The unexpected sound. The stars glowed brightly in the deep blackness of space. The Corsac ship, a large exploration vessel, drifted silently through the vast emptiness. It was one of the newest ships in the galaxy, built for long missions to explore uncharted areas. Captain Ilya stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless sea of stars. The quiet was almost peaceful, but Captain Ilya knew the calm wouldn't last long. Her crew had been traveling through the deep space for weeks, exploring unknown sectors. There was something about this mission that felt different, something she couldn't put her finger on. Something was waiting for them out there, hidden among the stars. She felt it in the air, in her bones, even if no one else did. "We're almost at the edge of the nebula zone, Captain," said Lieutenant Merrick, the ship's communications officer. He stood by the control panel, watching the blinking lights. "The sensors are picking up unusual readings." Ilya turned to look at him. "Unusual? What do you mean?" Merrick hesitated for a moment. "I'm not sure, Captain. The readings are strange. It's like there's something in this part of space that doesn't belong." Captain Ilya frowned. "Something. Or someone. We can't tell," Merrick replied, his voice tense. "But it's definitely there. A signal. It's faint, but it's definitely a signal." Ilya's heart skipped a beat. Space was vast, and usually signals were random, interference from stars or other natural phenomena. But this was different. This was a message, and someone, or something, had sent it. "Send it to the main screen," Ilya ordered, her voice calm, but with a sharp edge. The large screen at the front of the bridge flickered to life. A strange pattern of lights danced across the screen, filling the room with an eerie glow. The crew stared at the screen, puzzled. It was like no signal they had ever seen before. It wasn't any known language, nor was it a distress call. It was a series of rhythmic bursts, each one more intense than the last. "Can we trace it?" Ilya asked. Merrick worked quickly at his station. "Trying, Captain, but the signal is too powerful. It's disrupting our sensors." Ilya felt a chill crawl up her spine. The signal was too focused, too deliberate. Whatever, or whoever, was sending it, they knew exactly what they were doing. "Keep trying," she ordered. "I want to know where this is coming from." As Merrick worked, the crew continued to watch the signal on the screen. It was hypnotic, almost musical in its pattern. But it felt wrong. Something about it unsettled the crew, like a noise you can't ignore even if you want to. The strange pulses seemed to be alive, as though they were calling to them. Minutes passed, and the tension on the bridge grew. Ilya paced back and forth, her mind racing. She had heard rumors about lost human colonies, abandoned spaceships, and mysterious races that had come before them. Could this signal be the sign of something long forgotten? Or worse, something dangerous? Suddenly, the signal shifted. There was a sharp burst of static, followed by an unexpected sound. It was low at first, barely audible, like a growl in the distance, but then it grew louder, clearer. The sound seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull. It was no longer a signal. It was something alive, something physical. The entire ship seemed to hum with it. "What is that?" Lieutenant Merrick asked, his voice shaking. Captain Ilya felt her blood run cold. She had heard it too. It was a deep, resonating tone, almost like a warning. The sound echoed through the ship, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Time itself felt as if it had frozen. But then the sound grew louder. It was as if the ship was being surrounded by it. A low hum, a pulse. Every part of the Corsac ship felt it. The crew held their breath, watching the screen in fear. The tone had changed, now mixed with strange, sharp sounds that seemed to scrape against their ears. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a message they were not supposed to hear. "Captain," Merrick whispered, his voice trembling. "This isn't just a signal. This is a warning." Ilya turned sharply toward him. "What do you mean? A warning?" Before Merrick could answer, the sound stopped. The screen went dark, and the ship fell into an eerie silence. The crew looked at each other, confused and alarmed. They had been prepared for strange signals, for unknown creatures, for all the dangers of deep space, but they were not prepared for this. A voice broke through the tension, a voice that made every crew member on the bridge freeze. "Get out of here. Now." It was a whisper, a soft, menacing whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The voice sent shivers down Ilya's spine. She spun toward the comms panel, but no one had spoken. The room was silent, save for the sound of the ship's engines. Then the voice spoke again, louder this time. "Run, or face destruction." Ilya's heart raced. The crew could feel it. The unknown had just become very real, and it was angry. Whoever, or whatever, had sent that message, they had no intention of being ignored. "Get ready for anything," Ilya said, her voice steady despite the terror rising within her. "We don't know who or what we're dealing with." As the Corsac ship drifted in the eerie silence, the crew knew one thing for sure. They had just uncovered something far more dangerous than they ever imagined, and it was already aware of them. The unseen threat. The crew aboard the Corsac ship stood in stunned silence after the chilling voice echoed throughout the bridge. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The last words still hung in the air like a dark cloud. "Run, or face destruction." Captain Ilya's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The voice, so clear and so chilling, was not a human one. It wasn't a voice they could trace back to any known species. It didn't belong to any race they had encountered before. And the words it spoke weren't random. They were a warning, a threat. "Run," Ilya muttered under her breath, almost to herself. But run from what? Merrick, still at his station, nervously glanced at the screens. His fingers hovered over the control panel, but no one was giving any orders. His eyes flickered from one monitor to the next, trying to make sense of the data that was now pouring in. "Captain," Merrick finally spoke, his voice trembling. "The signal. It's coming from all around us. We're surrounded." Ilya spun toward him. "What do you mean surrounded? There's nothing here." "No ships, no planets, no visible obstacles," Merrick said, his voice filled with confusion and fear. "But the sensors are detecting massive energy readings all around us. Something is out there. Something powerful." The other crew members shifted nervously in their seats. They were all aware of the dangers lurking in the vast unknown, but they had never faced anything like this before. The unknown had always been a source of curiosity, a place to explore, but now it felt like a trap they had unknowingly walked right into. "Captain," Lieutenant Nora, the ship's chief engineer, spoke up. Her voice was calm but laced with concern. "I've been running diagnostic checks on the ship. The systems are starting to fail. Power is fluctuating, and some of the controls are unresponsive." Ilya's heart sank. A ship that was malfunctioning in the middle of deep space was a nightmare. A malfunction could turn a simple mission into a death sentence. "Can you isolate the problem?" Ilya asked, trying to stay calm. Nora shook her head. "It's not the systems. It's something affecting the ship from the outside. It's as if some kind of energy field is surrounding us, blocking our sensors and disrupting our technology. It's like nothing we've ever seen." A cold chill ran down Ilya's spine. She had heard stories, whispers, of ancient technologies that could interfere with ships. Old, forgotten technologies from civilizations long gone, buried in the folds of time. But to think that they had stumbled upon one was beyond her imagination. "Captain, look," shouted Merrick. Ilya's attention snapped back to the main screen. The stars outside the ship were flickering strangely. It wasn't just an optical illusion or interference. It was as if the very fabric of space was warping around them. The edges of the stars seemed to blur, their light bending and twisting in impossible ways. "Prepare for a jump," Ilya commanded. "Get us out of here. Now." But as the crew scrambled to execute her order, a sharp, high-pitched noise filled the air. The sound vibrated through the ship, rattling the walls. It was deafening, unnatural. The crew clutched their ears in agony as the sound intensified, shaking them to their core. "Stop! Shut it down!" Ilya screamed over the chaos. Merrick quickly worked to shut down the source of the noise, but the controls were locked. The ship seemed to be fighting them. It was as if some invisible force was blocking their every move. And then, without warning, everything went silent. The tension on the bridge was unbearable. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. For a moment, the ship was still, suspended in the vast emptiness of space. Then, a new sound broke the silence. A low hum, steady, powerful. The crew looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise, but it seemed to come from all around them, vibrating through the ship's hull. Ilya's stomach tightened. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a message. It was a presence, a force, a warning. "Captain," said Lieutenant Merrick, his voice barely a whisper. "The signal. It's coming again. But this time, it's different." Ilya nodded grimly. "Different how?" Merrick turned to her, his face pale. "This time, it's speaking directly to us." The words echoed throughout the bridge. A single, clear message. "You should not have come here." The crew froze. Ilya's mind raced. Whoever, or whatever, was speaking, it knew they were there. They had been watching them all along. It was no longer just a signal. It was a direct warning, and it was clear that their presence was unwanted. "Get ready," Ilya said, her voice steady despite the growing terror. "We're not alone out here, and I don't think they're going to let us leave." The crew stood in shocked silence, their fear palpable. They were trapped, caught in the grip of an unknown force that seemed to know everything about them. The Corsac ship, once a symbol of human exploration, now felt like a fragile vessel floating on the edge of disaster. And somewhere out in the dark, a presence waited, watching, biding its time. The unknown forces, the silence that followed the warning was deafening. The crew of the Corsac ship stood frozen in their seats, eyes wide, hearts racing. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound in the entire ship was the soft hum of the engines and the faint, eerie vibrations that reverberated through the hull. It felt as though the very air around them had thickened, becoming heavy with the weight of something unseen. Captain Ilya's mind raced as she processed the message they had just received. "You should not have come here." Those words repeated in her mind, echoing like a drumbeat. The gravity of the situation was sinking in fast. This wasn't just a random encounter or a misunderstanding. They were being hunted. And it was clear now, this wasn't just any force they were dealing with. Whoever or whatever this was, it had been waiting for them. It had known they were coming. "Captain." Merrick's voice broke through the heavy silence. He was staring at his console, his eyes wide with shock. "What is it, Merrick?" Ilya snapped, trying to steady her nerves. "There's something moving out there," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm picking up multiple readings from all directions, but nothing's showing up on our visual screens. It's like it's hiding." Ilya's breath caught in her throat. They were being watched. Not only that, but whatever this was, it was toying with them, letting them think they were alone, before revealing its true presence. "We need to get out of here," Ilya said urgently, gripping the edge of the command chair. "Now, set course for the nearest safe zone." But before anyone could react, another voice, cold and mechanical, echoed through the ship. It wasn't like the first warning. This time, it was sharper, more forceful. "You will not escape." The crew stiffened, looking around in terror. It was the same voice, louder, more powerful, as if it were coming from everywhere at once. The ship itself seemed to hum with the presence of this unseen force. Every control panel flickered with static. Lights flickered on and off. The crew had no idea what was happening. "You have trespassed where you should not have been. You will be judged." Ilya's blood ran cold. Judged. The word seemed to hang in the air like a final verdict. Her hand instinctively moved to the console, trying to regain control of the ship. But the controls were no longer responding. It was as if the Corsac ship was no longer in their hands. Whatever this force was, it had taken control. "Report," Ilya shouted, her voice sharp with desperation. Nora, the chief engineer, worked frantically at her station, trying to assess the ship's systems. "The main power grid is going down, Captain. The core is unstable," she cried, her voice filled with panic. "We won't last long if we don't regain control soon." Ilya's mind raced as she thought of their options. They had to act fast. The Corsac ship was their only chance of survival. But they were losing the fight. The system was shutting down one by one, as if some malevolent force were cutting them off from every possible escape route. The awakening of the ancient power. The ship's systems were in chaos. The crew could feel the vessel trembling beneath their feet, as if it were being pulled apart from the inside. Captain Ilya could hear the faint groans of metal and the sound of circuits malfunctioning all around her. Every command she gave, every attempt to regain control, was met with nothing but resistance. The ancient force they had unknowingly awakened had a grip on the ship like a vice. "Captain, we need to figure out what's happening," Merrick shouted, his hands flying over the unresponsive controls. "We're completely offline. I can't access any of the ship's core systems." Ilya clenched her jaw, her knuckles white from gripping the armrest of her chair. "I know, Merrick. I know." The strange mechanical voice that had spoken earlier echoed through the ship once more, sending shivers down the crew's spines. This time, it was even colder, more ominous. "You are not worthy. Your species cannot comprehend the forces you have awakened." The words hung in the air, suffocating the crew. Ilya's mind raced. What was this thing? What had they stumbled upon? They were no longer in their galaxy, surrounded by familiar stars and planets. They had been pulled into an empty void, a place outside of time and space. And whatever this force was, it was old, older than anything they had ever known. "Captain, look," Nora called from her console, her voice shaky with fear. She was staring at a strange pattern forming on one of the screens. "I'm picking up an energy signature. Something powerful, something ancient. It's coming from all directions." Ilya leaned over to get a better look at the screen. It was hard to make sense of what she was seeing. The readings didn't match anything the crew had encountered before. It wasn't a normal energy signature. It was as if the energy was coming from something that had existed for eons, something ancient that had been disturbed. "We've been caught in something far bigger than we can handle," Ilya muttered, her thoughts running wild. "This is a trap, and we've walked right into it." The ship trembled again, this time with more force. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging the crew into darkness. Panic began to rise among the crew as they scrambled to activate backup systems. "We need to get out of here," Merrick shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "Whatever this is, it's going to destroy us if we don't act fast." But no one responded. Everyone was too focused on the unyielding tremors that continued to rock the ship, as though the very fabric of the universe itself was unraveling around them. And then, just as quickly as the shaking started, it stopped. The ship fell silent again, almost unnervingly so. There was no hum of the engines, no soft whispers of life support systems. It was as though the ship was dead. A deep, unnatural silence hung over them. It was the kind of silence that made their ears ring, the kind that made their hearts race in the absence of sound. The crew exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to do next. And then, without warning, the lights came back on, but they were dim, flickering as if struggling to stay alive. The cold mechanical voice returned, louder and clearer than ever. "You will be judged, and you will fail." Ilya's heart skipped a beat. Judged? What did that mean? Were they being tested? It was as though they were being held captive by some higher power, and this judgment was something they had no control over. "Captain," Nora said, her voice trembling. I think we've just become part of something much bigger, something ancient. Ilya stood up, her mind racing with possibilities. Whatever this force was, it had the power to tear their ship apart. They were outmatched, outclassed, and out of their depth. They had no idea what they were dealing with. But what if this force wasn't just a mindless ancient power? What if it had a purpose? What if it wasn't just about destroying them? Ilya looked around at her crew, all of them shaken but determined. "We're not going to go down without a fight," she said, her voice steady, though the uncertainty was clear in her eyes. She turned back to her console and began working furiously, trying to access anything that could help them. The ship's systems were barely responsive, but she kept pushing forward, determined to find a way out. And then, in the midst of the chaos, something incredible happened. The energy readings on Nora's screen began to change. The strange signature that had been all around them began to focus, narrowing down to a single point. A bright, pulsating light appeared in the middle of the dark void. It was so intense that it seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Ilya's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "We're not being destroyed," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're being tested." But the realization only deepened the fear in her heart. The force wasn't just trying to destroy them, it was trying to understand them. And in doing so, it was subjecting them to something far worse than just death. It was testing their very will to survive. Suddenly, the ship's systems began to flicker back to life, one by one. The lights steadied. The engines hummed back into operation. But it wasn't over yet. The crew still had to face the force that had ensnared them. And now they knew that whatever this ancient power was, it would not let them go so easily. "Prepare yourselves," Ilya said, her voice grim. "This is only the beginning. The test of survival." The hum of the ship's revived systems was almost a comfort in the midst of the unknown. Yet the crew knew that this was only the beginning. The strange energy signature continued to pulse from the darkness, its source never truly visible. It seemed to be alive, sentient, and very much aware of their presence. They had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. Captain Ilya stood at the front of the bridge, her hands gripping the console tightly. Her thoughts raced, trying to piece together what was happening. "What is this place? What do they want from us?" she muttered under her breath. But the silence around her was suffocating. There were no answers. Not yet. "Captain, I'm picking up a new signal," Merrick said, his voice tight with anxiety. His eyes flickered nervously over the controls, as though searching for something, anything, that would make sense of what was happening. "It's coming from within the ship." Ilya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean within the ship? Are we being hacked?" Merrick's brow furrowed. "No, it's not like that. It's not a virus. It's more like the ship itself is sending out a signal. It's almost like it's alive." Before Ilya could respond, Nora's voice rang out from her station. "Captain, I'm getting visual feedback. There's a strange pattern forming on the monitors. It looks like a map. A map of this ship, but it's different." Ilya rushed to her side, her mind racing. What was this map? What was it showing? As she stared at the screen, she could see it too. It wasn't the layout of their ship, but something far more complex. The map was shifting, rearranging itself as though it had a mind of its own. Some sections pulsed with energy, glowing with an eerie light. Others were dark, silent, and distant. The map seemed to be pointing toward something, an unknown destination deep within the ship. This is impossible," Ilya whispered, not even realizing she had spoken aloud. "The ship, it's responding to something. Something outside of us. But how?" "It's not just responding," Merrick said, his voice low. "It's being controlled. I think whatever that force is, it's trying to communicate with us, and it wants us to follow this map." The crew was silent, their hearts pounding in their chests. If this force, this ancient power, was trying to communicate, then they had no choice but to follow its lead. It wasn't a question of if they would do it, but how far they were willing to go. "Captain," Nora said, her voice shaky, "the map leads to the central core, the heart of the ship." Ilya's gaze turned cold. The core of the ship was the most secure part of their vessel. It housed the engines, the primary power systems, and most importantly, the navigational systems that kept them on course. If this map was leading them to the core, it meant they were being guided toward something far greater than they had anticipated, something that was beyond their control. "We have no choice," Ilya said, turning to face the crew. "If this force is trying to communicate with us, we need to understand what it wants. We need to follow this map. We might learn something that can help us survive. Or we could walk straight into the heart of our destruction," Merrick muttered, though the fear in his voice was barely concealed. Without another word, the crew followed the map's eerie guidance. Every step they took seemed to make the air heavier, as though the ship itself was watching them, judging them. Their path took them through long, empty corridors where the flickering lights cast deep shadows, adding to the sense of dread that filled their hearts. As they approached the central core, Ilya couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The ship was alive in a way she had never imagined. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the floors groaned with every footstep. It was as if the very ship was alive, and it was waiting for them. When they finally reached the core, the door opened with a hiss, revealing a massive chamber bathed in a cold, blue light. The walls of the room were lined with intricate machinery, pulsating with an energy they had never seen before. The centerpiece of the room was a large, glowing sphere, its surface covered in strange symbols that seemed to move and shift with every passing moment. "It's beautiful," Nora whispered in awe. But Ilya wasn't so sure. The sphere was mesmerizing, yes, but there was something unnerving about it. It was too perfect, too alien. And the symbols, what were they? Were they a language, a warning? Before Ilya could voice her concerns, the ship's cold, mechanical voice filled the chamber again. "You have arrived at the source. Now you will face the consequences of your actions." The words were chilling, sending a wave of dread through the crew. The energy in the room seemed to intensify, the air thickening as the symbols on the sphere began to glow brighter. It was as if the room itself was alive, reacting to their presence. "We've reached the heart of the ship," Ilya said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But what now? What does it want from us?" The crew stood frozen, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. They had entered the unknown, and now they were face to face with something far older and more powerful than they had ever imagined. The ancient force was no longer just a distant threat. It was right here, with them, and they would have to face its judgment. The sphere pulsed one final time, and then a new voice emerged, a voice that sounded almost human. "It's not too late. You can still turn back." But Ilya knew that there was no turning back now. They had awakened something ancient, something far beyond their comprehension. And now they would have to deal with the consequences. The real test was about to begin. The choice of fate. The atmosphere in the chamber grew heavier with every passing second. The words echoed in Ilya's mind, the chilling voice reverberating through the very walls of the ship. "You can still turn back." The voice was calm, almost inviting, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air, as if it was daring them to defy its warning. Ilya's hands clenched into fists. She glanced around at her crew, each of them frozen, caught between fear and curiosity. The choice was theirs to make, and yet it felt like the weight of the entire galaxy hung in the balance. To leave now would mean abandoning everything they had worked for, but to press forward could mean entering a realm far beyond their understanding, a realm where they might not survive. The pulsating glow of the sphere was hypnotic, drawing them closer despite the warning in the voice. It was as though the sphere had a magnetic pull, an ancient, unfathomable force that was impossible to resist. But Ilya had to be strong. She couldn't let fear dictate their fate. "We can't turn back," she said finally, her voice firm, though it was laced with a quiet apprehension. "We've come this far. The galaxy is already watching. They're waiting for us to either conquer or fail. We can't fail now." Merrick, who had remained silent up until now, looked at Ilya with wide eyes. His face was pale, the stress and fear of the situation clear. "But what if we don't understand what we're dealing with? What if we're walking straight into our doom?" "We'll face it together," Ilya replied, locking eyes with him. Her gaze was unwavering. "We were chosen for this mission, and we're the only ones who can make it through." Nora stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Captain," the voice said, "we could turn back. What if we're meant to learn something from this, something that could change everything?" Ilya's mind raced. What if there was a way to learn from this ancient force? What if they could communicate, understand it, and gain its power? Or was it a test? A trap to destroy them, to show the futility of defying such an ancient force? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she couldn't afford to back down now. "Whatever happens," Ilya said, her voice resolute, "we have to move forward. We will uncover the truth, whether we're prepared for it or not." With one final glance at her crew, she took a deep breath and approached the sphere. The closer she got, the more intense the light became. It wasn't blinding, but it filled the chamber with a deep, pulsating energy that seemed to sync with the beating of her heart. The symbols on the sphere swirled faster, as though recognizing her presence, anticipating her next move. Nora took a hesitant step forward, her eyes glued to the sphere. "Captain, what is it? What's happening to the ship?" Ilya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched the surface of the sphere. The moment her skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, causing her to stagger back. Her mind was flooded with images, vast landscapes, alien structures, and an ancient civilization, long lost to time. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, the flood of information too overwhelming to process. But then it stopped. The visions ceased, and she found herself standing alone in the center of the chamber, her pulse racing. She looked around, disoriented, as the sphere began to glow brighter, its energy wrapping around her like an invisible force, pressing against her very soul. "You have made your choice," the voice said again. But this time, it was not just one voice. It was a chorus of voices reverberating through her mind, resonating with an ancient power. "The awakening has begun." Ilya stumbled back, but the energy held her in place. She couldn't move, couldn't break free from the force that surrounded her. The crew stood by, helpless, unsure of what to do. "Ilya!" Merrick shouted, his voice filled with panic. "What's happening to her?" "I don't know," Nora replied, her eyes wide with fear. But it was too late to stop now. The sphere had begun its work. It was awakening something far more powerful than any of them had anticipated. Ilya's mind swirled with visions, each one more intense than the last. The ancient civilization that once thrived on this ship. They were long gone, but their technology and knowledge had survived. And now, it was awakening once more. The ship had been dormant for eons, waiting for someone to come, waiting for them. The ship was alive, and it was calling to them. But what did it want? Was it asking for help, or was it testing them? Was it a force for good, or a deadly power that would destroy them all? Suddenly, the energy surged again, but this time, it was different. This time, it felt as though the ship itself was speaking directly to her. "You have awakened us." The voice was different now, more powerful, more commanding. It was no longer a plea or a warning. It was a declaration. "You have awoken the heart of the ship, and now, you must face the consequences." Ilya's breath caught in her throat. The ship had been dormant for so long, but now it was alive. And with it came a power they couldn't possibly comprehend. What had they unleashed? And what was the true cost of awakening this ancient force? The consequences unleashed. The moment the words echoed in Ilya's mind, A tremor ran through the entire ship. It wasn't just a physical vibration. It was as if the very fabric of reality around them was shifting. The walls groaned under the pressure, the lights flickering as though the ship was awakening from an ancient slumber. The energy from the sphere surged again, but this time it wasn't gentle or guiding. It was forceful, a demand. "Captain." Merrick's voice was barely audible over the sound of the ship's groaning hull. His voice carried the weight of panic. "What's happening to the ship?" "The core is destabilizing." Ilya's pulse raced. The ship's systems were failing, every console flickering in chaotic bursts, and the gravitational field seemed to shift beneath their feet. For a moment, it felt as though the entire ship was shaking, as though it were about to break apart. She stumbled, struggling to stay on her feet, but the energy from the sphere held her in place. The air around them felt thick, charged with an ancient power. The crew tried to move toward Ilya, but something invisible held them back. The ship itself seemed to be reacting to the presence of the crew, its power seeking something, or someone. But it wasn't just energy. It felt like a presence, a consciousness. "Everyone, hold on," Ilya shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She reached out and gripped the edge of the console next to her. "We have to stay focused. We need to understand what we've awakened." But as she spoke, the air shifted again. There was a sudden, sharp crackling sound, like the sound of static electricity, but amplified, echoing all around them. Ilya's eyes widened as she looked back at the sphere. It was no longer just a glowing object. It had transformed, shifting its shape, its energy reaching out in tendrils, snaking toward the walls, the very structure of the ship. And then, without warning, the voice came again, louder now, like a thunderclap. "The time has come. You will learn what you have awoken, but only if you prove worthy." The words weren't just in their minds now. They vibrated in the very air around them, shaking the very foundation of the ship. Ilya's heart raced as she realized that the ship wasn't just alive. It was more than alive. It had a purpose, a mission, and they were now part of it. "Prove worthy," Nora muttered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What does that mean?" Ilya didn't have an answer. She was still reeling from the overwhelming force, trying to grasp the full extent of what was happening. She felt the ship's energy reverberating through her bones, every pulse of the ship's power making her feel both alive and insignificant at the same time. It was like the ship had become an extension of herself, and she could feel its ancient memories rising to the surface. Suddenly, the air shifted again, but this time it was different. A blinding light enveloped the crew, and they instinctively shielded their eyes, unable to look directly at the source. It wasn't like anything they had experienced before. A force, powerful and untouchable, was pressing against them from all directions. When the light faded, Ilya found herself standing in a vast, unfamiliar landscape. She blinked in confusion, looking around. The ship, the chamber, and her crew had disappeared. The landscape around her was nothing like Earth. Vast, endless skies stretched above, filled with swirling, storm-like clouds that seemed to pulse with energy. The ground beneath her feet was made of dark stone, and strange, bioluminescent plants seemed to grow from cracks in the earth. The voice returned, now booming in her mind, as if coming from the very air itself. "You have entered the realm of the ship's past. You are now within the heart of what we once were. You must understand it before you can leave." Ilya's breath caught in her throat. This was no longer just a ship. It was a living memory, a powerful entity that had once been more than just a machine. The vision around her pulsed with an ancient energy, and she felt the weight of its history pressing down on her. The others appeared beside her, Merrick, Nora, and the rest of the crew. They were just as disoriented, but there was a sense of unity between them. They had to face whatever this was together. "Is this real?" Merrick asked, his voice strained as he looked around. "Are we dreaming?" "I don't know," Ilya replied. Her voice was shaky. "But we have to find a way back. We can't be trapped here forever." The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a deep rumble echoed from all directions. The vision around them began to shift, revealing glimpses of a once thriving civilization, mighty cities, towering structures, and fleets of ships. But as the images continued to evolve, they showed a darker side: destruction, chaos, and finally, the collapse of everything. Ilia's heart clenched as she realized what the ship had once been. This wasn't just a vehicle. It had been the heart of an empire, a mighty civilization that had ruled across the stars. But something had gone terribly wrong. She had to understand it. They all had to understand it. The truth of what had happened here could be the key to unlocking their survival or their destruction. "You have awakened us," the voice boomed again, breaking through the silence. "Now you must prove your worth. Only those who are worthy may leave this place with the knowledge you seek." The weight of the words was clear. They had no choice. They had to prove their worth, or they would be trapped here forever, at the mercy of the ancient force that controlled the ship. Ilia took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever challenge lay ahead. The fate of her crew, and perhaps the galaxy itself, rested on her ability to survive this trial. And she wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when they had come this far. With a determined expression, she turned to her crew. "We face this together," she said, her voice steady, but her heart pounded in her chest. "Whatever happens, we stand united. We will learn the truth, and we will survive." The ship's energy surged around them, and the world around them shimmered, preparing to test them in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. But they had no choice. They had to face what came next. The true test was about to begin.